You didn't decide to do it. You couldn't stop it if you tried. Someone points out you have spinach in your teeth in front of a room full of people, and before you've even finished being embarrassed, your face is already red, broadcasting the fact to everyone in the room before you've said a single word. Charles Darwin, of all people, was obsessed with this exact moment. He called blushing the most peculiar and the most human of all expressions. So what did Darwin see in a little redness in the face that made him call it the most human thing we do? Here's what makes blushing strange if you actually think about it. It's an involuntary broadcast of your internal state, aimed outward, that you have essentially no ability to suppress once it starts. Most of what your body does under stress, sweating, heart rate, you can at least partially hide or explain away. Blushing is different. It's advertising. That should bother you a little. Why would evolution build something that makes you worse at hiding embarrassment in a species that generally benefits from controlling what other people know about you? Let's go. Mechanically, a blush happens when the blood vessels in your face, the cheeks especially, but also the ears, neck, and upper chest, dilate rapidly, increasing blood flow close to the skin's surface. It's triggered through the sympathetic nervous system, the same general system involved in fight or flight responses. But blushing is a distinct pattern, not just generic stress arousal. The face has an unusually dense network of blood vessels close to the surface compared to a lot of other skin, which is part of why this reaction is so visible there specifically, rather than being an all-over body flush. When Darwin studied blushing in his 1872 work on emotional expression, his specific claim wasn't just humans blush and animals don't, in some vague sense. It was more precise than that. He argued that blushing is uniquely tied to self-attention and the awareness of being observed and judged by others, what he called attention directed to the mind. He documented it across an enormous range of human cultures he had access to information about, concluding it appeared to be close to universal in humans in ways few other expressions were. Darwin spent an unreasonable amount of time in the 1800s writing letters to missionaries and colonial officials around the world, asking, essentially, does the local population turn red when embarrassed? That's a real thing he did. In 1867, he circulated a printed questionnaire to correspondents across the world, specifically probing which facial expressions, blushing included, showed up in cultures far removed from his own. It's worth knowing that blushing remained a surprisingly understudied topic for a long time after Darwin. One leading contemporary researcher in the field, Ray Crozier, an honorary professor at Cardiff University who has specialized in the psychology of blushing and shyness for decades, has described it as a phenomenon that's easy to notice, but has historically received far less sustained scientific investigation than you'd expect, given how universal and strange it is. That's changed somewhat in recent years, and one especially significant development is clinical. Blushing was specifically recognized in the DSM-5, the standard diagnostic manual used by mental health professionals, as a hallmark physiological response associated with social anxiety disorder. Researchers have developed formal measurement tools, including a self-report blushing propensity scale, to study individual differences in how often people blush and how distressing they find it. This tells you something important. Blushing isn't just a quirky evolutionary leftover academics find charming to theorize about. It's serious enough, clinically, to be a recognized diagnostic marker for a real, common mental health condition affecting a meaningful portion of the population. Here's an important correction, and it's worth being upfront about it. Saying blushing is something only humans do needs a caveat. Some other animals do show blood flow changes in skin or comparable tissue under stress or arousal. Certain primates and other species have documented vascular responses in bare skin areas. What appears to be genuinely distinct about human blushing isn't the raw physiology in isolation. It's the specific link to self-conscious social emotion. Shame, embarrassment, awareness of being judged. That particular combination, an involuntary, visible signal tied specifically to social self-evaluation, is what researchers and Darwin himself treated as distinctly, or at least unusually, human, rather than blushing being literally the only vascular response of its kind anywhere in the animal kingdom. Here's a piece of evidence Darwin himself specifically noted, and that later researchers have continued to find relevant. People who are blind from birth and have therefore never once visually observed another person's blush to imitate it, still blush from embarrassment. Darwin recorded this observation directly in his own correspondence and writing, citing reports from people who worked closely with blind individuals. This detail matters for the innateness question at the center of this whole video. If blushing were purely a learned social performance, copied by watching other people's faces, the way you might learn to raise an eyebrow theatrically, it's hard to explain why someone who has never seen a face do it would still do it themselves, reliably, in the same triggering situations. This lines up with a broader pattern researchers have found studying facial expressions more generally in congenitally blind individuals. Several core emotional expressions show up reliably, even in people who could never have learned them by visual copying, supporting the idea that at least the baseline expression itself is biologically wired in, even if the more complex social skill of consciously controlling or performing facial expressions for an audience does require learning and visual feedback that blind individuals don't have full access to. Here's the counterintuitive part. You'd think broadcasting your embarrassment involuntarily would be a disadvantage. It hands information to everyone around you that you might rather keep private. But psychologists studying blushing have proposed that it functions as an honest, hard-to-fake social signal. It visibly communicates, "I know I broke a social rule. I recognize it. I care about your judgment," without a single word. Because it can't be easily faked or suppressed on demand, it's a credible signal in a way a verbal apology alone isn't. In small ancestral groups, where ongoing cooperation and reputation mattered enormously, an automatic, unfakeable, "I recognize I violated a norm and I care" signal could plausibly have been socially useful. It can diffuse tension and invite forgiveness faster than words alone. This isn't just a plausible theory, it's been tested directly. Researchers Corinne Dyke, Brian Koenig, Tim Ketelaar, and Peter de Jong ran an experiment published in the journal Emotion, in which participants played a trust-based economic game against a computerized partner who betrayed them. Participants then saw a photo of that partner's face, shown either blushing or not blushing. Despite having just been betrayed by this same partner, participants who saw the blushing version of the face went on to entrust significantly more money to them in a follow-up trust task than participants who saw the non-blushing version and rated the blushing partner as more trustworthy and less likely to betray them again. The blush alone, with no apology, no words, no other information, measurably changed how much people were willing to trust someone who had just wronged them. Your face is, biologically speaking, running an involuntary apology system that you never agreed to install and cannot uninstall. And according to actual controlled research, it works better than you'd expect at getting people to give you a second chance. Here's a genuinely useful, well-researched twist that complicates the broadcast framing a little. A body of research on what psychologists call the spotlight effect, studied extensively by researchers including Thomas Gilovich, has found that people consistently and substantially overestimate how much other people actually notice their appearance, mistakes, and visible emotional reactions, blushing very much included. In one well-known study, participants who wore a shirt with a potentially embarrassing image significantly overestimated how many people in a room would later remember seeing it. A closely related finding, sometimes called the illusion of transparency, shows that people also overestimate how visible their internal emotional states are to others. You feel like your embarrassment and your blush are radiating out for everyone to see, and observers, research suggests, generally notice far less than you assume. So the signal is real, and it is genuinely hard to fake or suppress, but its actual social broadcast power in any given moment is probably smaller than it feels like from the inside, sitting there with your face burning. That gap between how exposed you feel and how exposed you actually are is itself a well-studied and fairly reliable pattern in human social cognition. The good news buried in decades of psychology research: the room is very likely thinking about their own stuff, not cataloging the exact shade of red your face turned 3 minutes ago. There's a deeper layer under all of this. Blushing from embarrassment requires something psychologically sophisticated, an awareness not just of being looked at, but of what other minds might be thinking about you. Researchers studying self-conscious emotions place embarrassment and shame in a distinct category from more basic emotions like fear, precisely because they require this kind of social self-modeling, imagining yourself through someone else's evaluative eyes. That's a cognitively demanding capacity, and it's part of why self-conscious blushing, tied to that specific mental capability, is treated as unusual outside of humans, even though isolated vascular responses elsewhere in nature aren't. Here's where the ancient brain thread comes back in. Your blush reflex evolved entirely in a world of small face-to-face groups, where being watched always meant actual people, physically present, actually judging you in real time. It has no way of distinguishing that from a video call freezing on an unflattering angle, or a message read receipt that makes it obvious you're being watched digitally. The circuitry fires the same way, because as far as your nervous system is concerned, being seen is being seen. It never had to evolve a special case for cameras. In that gap, an ancient, unfakeable social signal, empirically shown to buy real trust, even after a real betrayal, firing in a world full of audiences your ancestors never had to account for, is part of a much bigger pattern running through basically all of your inherited social wiring. The mechanism didn't change. The number and nature of the eyes on you did, by many orders of magnitude. And there's a second layer of mismatch worth naming. The spotlight effect research means that even in a small ancestral group, you were probably always overestimating how closely people tracked your every blush. The gap between how exposed I feel and how exposed I actually am isn't a modern problem. It's likely an old one, just operating at a much smaller, more survivable scale. So next time your face gives you away before you've said a word, that's not a flaw, and it's not weakness. Darwin was right to be fascinated by it, right down to noticing that people born blind, who had never once seen another person's face turn red, still blushed the same way everyone else does. It's one of the only truly honest signals your body sends, tested and shown in real experiments to earn people's trust back, even after you've actually let them down. It was built for a world of maybe 40 watching faces, most of whom, statistically, were probably thinking about their own embarrassing moment rather than cataloging yours. It's still faithfully firing in a world that now has, some days, millions of potential watchers. And it's still, underneath all of that noise, doing the same simple, honest job it always did.